20 seconds. That was all it took to change the room. The white horse lowered his head, bent one knee, and held still like he knew a secret none of us were ready to hear. No one clapped. No one breathed. A bow in a place built for bids. It felt like a goodbye that arrived before the words. The hall smelled of straw and polish. Coats creaked. Shoes shuffled and then went quiet again. The auctioneer's hand hovered over the bell but did not ring it. Lot 12, he said, voice thin. Snow. The horse stood in the circle with the rope loose under his chin. He did not fight. He did not blink much. His coat looked like winter light, calm and clean. The handler, an older man named Jonah, read the card and stopped halfway. His mouth moved but the sound did not come. He stared at Snow like he had lost something and had just found it again. A woman near me whispered, "Is he trained to do that?" Her friend shook his head. "Not like this." The bow held for a long count. The air pressed on our shoulders. Somewhere in the back a child asked, "Is the horse sad?" A voice, maybe the mother, said, "Shoo." Snow rose slow, almost careful, and turned one ear toward the door. Jonah's hands shook as he checked the lead. "Easy boy," he said. "I hear you." The auctioneer cleared his throat. We will take a moment." He set the bell down like it might break. I stood behind the black rope and felt a pull I could not name. I had come to watch, not to buy. I told myself that. But the horse's eyes looked past the crowd, past the numbers, past the talk of bloodlines. He searched for someone who used to stand in a spot that now sat empty. It was strange how sure I felt about that. It was stranger how sure we all felt. "Jonah," the auctioneer said, softer now, "does he do that often?" "Only once," Jonah answered. His voice found itself and then cracked. "Only once when he, never mind." He rubbed the side of Snow's face with two fingers like he was afraid of pressing too hard. The horse leaned into the touch and breathed out. Sounded like a word. It sounded like wait. No bids came. Not one card lifted. The bell did not ring. The white horse watched the door again, and the room understood there was a story we had not heard yet, and that it was already pulling us toward it. Jonah led Snow out of the ring, and the crowd parted without being asked. It felt wrong to stand in his way, like blocking someone walking toward a memory. The auctioneer set the card aside and rubbed his forehead, confused and helpless. People whispered now, not the loud, curious kind, but the quiet kind used in hospitals and church pews. Something sacred had passed through that room and none of us knew what to do with it. I followed at a distance, unsure why my feet moved. Snow walked steady, not tired, not nervous, just sure, like he had somewhere specific to be. Jonah kept one hand on his mane, not to control him, but like someone holding the arm of a friend who didn't need guidance, only company. Outside, the cold air hit our faces. Autumn leaves rolled across the yard like reminders of time moving even when hearts don't. Snow stopped near the old oak by the parking lot. Jonah didn't speak. He just stood beside him, breathing with him. A woman approached quietly. "Sir," she said, "is he all right?" Jonah smiled without turning. "He's all right. He's just remembering." "Remembering who?" Jonah hesitated. "Someone who never came back." That sentence fell heavy. No more questions came. Snow lowered his head again, not all the way, just enough to touch the grass. If horses prayed, maybe it looked like that. The wind pulled Jonah's coat, and he closed his eyes like he felt something important passing by. A man in a dark coat stepped forward. "If he's grieving, he shouldn't be here," he said. "He looks healthy. I'll make an offer now. Full market value." Jonah looked at him slowly. "He's not grieving for himself." "For who then?" "For a girl," Jonah whispered. "Lily." The name hit like a quiet bell. The man in the coat shifted, irritated that grief didn't listen to business. "Grief is for people," he muttered. Jonah turned his head, and his voice lost its softness. "Then you have never seen a horse wait at a gate every morning for someone who never came." Silence again. Even the leaves seemed to stop sliding across the ground. I felt something move inside me. Guilt? Memory? I had stood at a gate once too, waiting for someone I knew would never return. Snow lifted his head then and our eyes met. It wasn't human, but it understood something human. Jonah finally spoke, softer now. She brushed him every Saturday. Told him secrets she never told people. Laughed that sounded like spring. Then one week she didn't come. Then another. He swallowed hard. Leukemia. She wanted to visit one last time. Doctor said too risky. Snow waited anyway. The man in the coat stepped back. No offer followed. Snow breathed slow and deep. Jonah rested his hand on the horse's neck, and Snow leaned into him like the world was heavy and only one touch kept him steady. Something in my chest tightened. This wasn't about buying. It wasn't about horses. It was about promises life didn't let us finish. And suddenly I realized, this goodbye had been waiting longer than any of us knew. I stayed where I was, half hidden near the barn wall. I didn't know these people, or this horse, or the girl whose name suddenly felt like a prayer. Yet something tied me there like a string pulled tight between past and present. Snow lifted his head again and looked at the oak tree. Not just a glance, like he expected someone to walk out from behind it. Someone small, laughing, running, jacket too big, boots too loose. Someone who never made it back. Jonah let out a shaky breath. Every Saturday, he murmured. Rain, heat, didn't matter. They had a ritual. She'd tell him stories, school, her dreams, the names she gave clouds. He forced a quiet laugh. She thought clouds needed names. Said it was rude not to give them one. A young stable hand nearby wiped her cheek quick, embarrassed anyone might see. She sounds sweet, she whispered. She was hope, Jonah said simply. Snow shifted, restless but not anxious. Like he felt the weight of memories pressing around him. He nudged Jonah's coat pocket, gentle but insistent. You still have it, don't you? Someone asked. Jonah didn't answer. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a tiny purple ribbon. Faded, frayed at one edge. Small enough for a child's hair. The world around us shrank to that ribbon. Snow exhaled hard like he recognized it. Like it still held her laugh in its fibers. She gave him this on her last good day, Jonah whispered. Said he earned a ribbon for being her hero. And after she passed? I asked before I could stop myself. Jonah looked at me like he didn't expect a stranger to speak. He searched every Saturday. Walked to the gate on his own. Stood there until sunset. Then one morning, his voice trembled. He stopped going. Didn't eat that day. Didn't want anyone near him. Just stared at the ribbon hanging on his stall. Snow pressed his nose into Jonah's shoulder then, a soft but desperate gesture. His breath made a small cloud in the cold air. I swallowed. He loved her. Jonah nodded. Grief like that, you don't teach it. You don't train it. You just watch and hope they survive it. Footsteps approached from behind. The barn manager, a stern woman with silver hair, walked over holding a clipboard. Jonah, they're waiting inside for your decision. Jonah stared at Snow, eyes red but steady. I'm not ready to let him go. The manager softened. Sometimes holding on is love. Sometimes letting go is too. Jonah closed his hand around the ribbon like it was alive. I know. But today, his voice cracked. Today he remembered her. I won't take him from that. Snow brushed Jonah's sleeve again, slow and full of something that hurt to watch. I realized then, this wasn't only the horse's goodbye. It was Jonah's too. And the hardest part of love was happening in front of us. Not losing someone. Learning how to live when they're already gone. Jonah and Snow stayed under that oak tree like time paused for them. People tried to go back inside, pretend it was just an auction, just another Saturday, just another horse. But footsteps slowed and most never truly left. They lingered by windows, doorways, pretending to browse catalog sheets while their eyes kept drifting outside. Something in the air asked us to witness, not walk away. I stood closer now, though I didn't remember moving. Snow's breath came in slow clouds, each one steady like he was gathering something soft from the past and holding it carefully. Jonah touched the ribbon to his forehead and then to Snow's mane, like a small blessing. She used to braid this into his hair, Jonah said. Said it made him look like a prince. A tear slid down his cheek. He believed her. Snow lifted his head and nudged Jonah again, this time stronger, as if pushing a memory into the present. A voice behind me spoke gently, Do horses remember that deeply? I turned. It was the stable girl again, eyes shining but steady. Maybe they don't remember the way we do, I said. Maybe they just feel what we try to forget. She nodded, wiping her sleeve across her face before tears could fall again. Just then the barn doors swung open. A couple in expensive coats walked out, sharp faces, quick steps, impatient. We drove 3 hours, the man snapped. If the horse is sound, we'll take him. Emotional theatrics don't matter. A horse is a horse. Jonah didn't turn. He just said quietly, Then you don't know horses. Snow's ears flicked back, catching the tone behind the words. He didn't look at the couple. He didn't need to. His body already answered for him, still, strong, settled in loyalty. The woman scoffed. Sentimental nonsense ruins business. Some things shouldn't be business, I replied before I could stop myself. They looked at me like I had insulted logic. Then they left, heels tapping, annoyed at love they could not price. Snow suddenly stepped forward, not away from Jonah but toward the oak. Jonah followed, puzzled. The horse stopped at a low branch, nose brushing the bark. Jonah frowned. "What is it, boy?" The stable girl gasped. "Look." Tied around the branch, nearly hidden in the rough wood, was another ribbon. This one pale pink, weather-beaten, edges curled. Time had tried to swallow it, but it still held on. Jonah's hand trembled as he touched it. I never saw this." Snow lowered his head as if relieved, as if saying, "You were not meant to. She left it for when you needed it most." The wind shifted then, warm for 1 second in the cold air, like a small hand brushing past. Leaves rustled gently around Snow's hooves, circling like they recognized him. Jonah closed his eyes. She came here herself. The day she knew. It wasn't a question. It was truth landing where it needed to land. "I don't think she wanted us to be sad forever," he whispered. "I think she wanted him to know she didn't forget him." Snow breathed out, long and deep, and for the first time since the bow, his body relaxed. His ears softened. His stance eased. It felt like a knot loosened inside his chest. And ours. Sometimes the hardest goodbyes aren't spoken. Sometimes they appear years later, hanging quietly in a tree, waiting for the right moment to be found. The pink ribbon fluttered in the wind, and Jonah just stood there, hand resting against the bark like he needed the tree to hold him up. Snow didn't move. He simply waited, steady and patient like he had always been, especially for her. I watched Jonah's breathing slow, each inhale deeper than the last, as if he'd been holding a hurt inside him too long and finally found a place to set it down. He reached carefully, untied the ribbon, and held it next to the purple one. His hands shook not from weakness but from meaning, from memory, from love that didn't fit in words. 2 ribbons, he whispered. One for who he was to her, and one for what they never got to finish. Snow pressed his nose into Jonah's arm again, gentle, steady, familiar. It wasn't grief this time. It felt like closure that had taken the long way home. The stable girl sniffed. "It's like she's still cheering for him." Jonah smiled a small, aching smile. "No. She's thanking him." Behind us, footsteps clicked again. The auctioneer approached, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in his own skin. Not like a man running a business, like someone walking into a church, afraid to speak too loud. "Jonah," he murmured. "I need an answer about his lot. People are waiting." Jonah looked at Snow, then the ribbons, then at nothing at all for a moment. A long breath carried through him. "He's not being sold today." The auctioneer nodded. There was no argument, no push. Just surrender to the moment. "I'll mark him withdrawn." As he walked away, Snow lifted his head slowly, turned, not to Jonah, not to the tree, but to look directly at me. His eyes didn't search me, they understood me. That strange, silent understanding that animals sometimes hold when they see something broken in you that you try to hide from everyone else. "Do you think he's finally letting go?" I asked softly. Jonah shook his head. "Letting go isn't the right word. He's learning how to carry it differently." Snow shifted his weight, and for the first time, his tail swished lightly, like a breeze finally moved through still water. A quiet sign of peace. But moments like peace don't stay untouched forever. A voice called from across the yard. Firm, brisk, business cold. "Jonah. We need to talk." A tall woman in a sharp coat strode toward us, a folder tucked under her arm, boots too clean for a barn. Her face was composed, but her walk was urgent. Jonah straightened. "Not now." She lifted a paper. "I represent a foundation. We're prepared to pay triple today's highest valuation. Right now." I felt the air tighten again. The stable girl froze. Even Snow's ears tilted back. Not fearful but aware. Jonah's jaw clenched. "He's not for sale." The woman smiled, polite but steely. "Some animals don't get second chances. And neither do barns. Think before you answer." Her words landed sharp, not at Snow but at the world that always tries to put a number on what cannot be priced. Jonah didn't speak. He just placed both ribbons in his pocket and rested his hand on Snow's neck. Snow didn't look at her. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He simply leaned into Jonah's hand like the answer was already chosen. Still, the storm had arrived, this time not from clouds, but from life's quiet way of testing whether love could survive practicality. And we all felt it. The hardest decisions were still ahead. The pink ribbon fluttered in the wind, and Jonah just stood there, hand resting against the bark like he needed the tree to hold him up. Snow didn't move. He simply waited, steady and patient like he had always been, especially for her. I watched Jonah's breathing slow, Each inhaled deeper than the last, as if he'd been holding a hurt inside him too long and finally found a place to set it down. He reached carefully, untied the ribbon, and held it next to the purple one. His hands shook not from weakness but from meaning, from memory, from love that didn't fit in words. 2 ribbons, he whispered. One for who he was to her, and one for what they never got to finish. Snow pressed his nose into Jonah's arm again, gentle, steady, familiar. It wasn't grief this time. It felt like closure that had taken the long way home. The stable girl sniffed. It's like she's still cheering for him. Jonah smiled a small, aching smile. No. She's thanking him. Behind us, footsteps clicked again. The auctioneer approached, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in his own skin. Not like a man running a business, like someone walking into a church, afraid to speak too loud. Jonah, he murmured. I need an answer about his lot. People are waiting. Jonah looked at Snow, then the ribbons, then at nothing at all for a moment. A long breath carried through him. He's not being sold today. The auctioneer nodded. There was no argument, no push. Just surrender to the moment. I'll mark him withdrawn. As he walked away, Snow lifted his head slowly, turned, not to Jonah, not to the tree, but to look directly at me. His eyes didn't search me, they understood me. That strange, silent understanding that animals sometimes hold when they see something broken in you that you try to hide from everyone else. Do you think he's finally letting go? I asked softly. Jonah shook his head. Letting go isn't the right word. He's learning how to carry it differently. Snow shifted his weight, and for the first time, his tail swished lightly, like a breeze finally moved through still water. A quiet sign of peace. But moments like peace don't stay untouched forever. A voice called from across the yard. Firm, brisk, business cold. Jonah. We need to talk. A tall woman in a sharp coat strode toward us, a folder tucked under her arm, boots too clean for a barn. Her face was composed, but her walk was urgent. Jonah straightened. Not now. She lifted a paper. I represent a foundation. We're prepared to pay triple today's highest valuation. Right now. I felt the air tighten again. The stable girl froze. Even Snow's ears tilted back, not fearful but aware. Jonah's jaw clenched. He's not for sale. The woman smiled, polite but steely. Some animals don't get second chances. And neither do barns. Think before you answer. Her words landed sharp, not at Snow but at the world that always tries to put a number on what cannot be priced. Jonah didn't speak. He just placed both ribbons in his pocket and rested his hand on Snow's neck. Snow didn't look at her. Didn't flinch. Didn't blink. He simply leaned into Jonah's hand like the answer was already chosen. Still, the storm had arrived, this time not from clouds, but from life's quiet way of testing whether love could survive practicality. And we all felt it. The hardest decisions were still ahead. Jonah held the drawing like it was glass and fire at the same time, fragile, burning, impossible to let go. Snow touched the paper gently with his nose, then lifted his head and stood taller than before, like memory gave him strength instead of weight. The grandfather leaned against the stall, breathing slow as though every inhale hurt and every exhale healed. She always said he was her brave snow cloud, the old man murmured. Jonah blinked. Snow cloud. She said white horses looked like clouds that came down to walk beside you. He smiled weakly. Said they listened better than angels. Snow let out a soft rumbling sound, deep like a bass note you feel more than hear. It wasn't a cry. It wasn't a sigh. It was something like I know. The woman with the contract shifted, suddenly small in her expensive coat. Her voice lost its edge. I didn't know. Jonah wiped his face with his sleeve, not embarrassed. Most don't. Until life reminds them. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. The woman swallowed, lowered the folder and stepped back, not defeated but changed. She looked at Snow, at the grandfather, at that little drawing like she had stepped into a story she did not earn but was allowed to witness. He shouldn't go anywhere, she said quietly. Not now. Not ever. The stable girl nodded, tears shining like morning dew. Some hearts belong to places. Snow nudged Jonah again, a firm push this time, as if saying stand up. There's more to do. Elijah straightened. The old man looked at him, eyes watery but clear. She didn't want him lonely. I know, Jonah whispered. I thought giving him a new life would fix things. But I forgot, his life was her. The grandfather suddenly steadied himself and spoke gently, then give him meaning, not distance. Jonah looked confused. Meaning? Let children come. To kids. Lonely ones. Let them sit with him. Let him carry what she couldn't finish. The words felt like a door opening somewhere inside the barn, inside Jonah, inside us. Hope didn't arrive loudly, just quietly, like a warm coat placed around cold shoulders. Snow turned his head toward the stall door, pushing it gently. It swung open without a sound, like it had always been waiting. He stepped into the aisle and paused, looking toward the pasture gate. No bow now. No trembling grief. Just calm direction. "Where's he going?" the girl whispered. Jonah smiled through tears. "To the place she used to take him. The hill behind the barn." We followed, slow and silent. Every step felt like we walked behind something sacred. The grandfather shuffled beside me, his hand brushing Snow's back now and then, like he was reconnecting with years he had avoided. At the top of the hill, Snow stopped. The view stretched over golden fields. Wind moved through the grass like hands smoothing a blanket. Jonah held the drawing to his chest, then tucked it into his coat close to his heart. "He came here every Saturday," Jonah whispered. "With her." The grandfather nodded. "Let him have this. Then we go back. And the new chapter starts." Snow stood still, eyes half closed, not in sadness, but in peace. The wind lifted the ends of Jonah's coat and brushed the ribbons in his pocket, making them flutter like wings. The grandfather whispered something too soft to fully catch. But I heard one part. "Thank you for waiting." Snow gently lowered his head. No bow of goodbye this time, just a bow of understanding, gratitude, memory, faith. The kind you give when a promise has finally been kept. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning, wearing the clothing of a goodbye. Some grief doesn't disappear. It just learns to walk beside you, like a white horse in quiet fields, carrying the memory of the ones who loved you first. Snow lifted his head as the wind moved through the hilltop grass, and for a long moment no one spoke. We stood in silence, not because silence was required, but because it felt right. Peace demands quiet. Healing arrives gently. Some moments aren't meant to be filled with words. Jonah finally breathed out, a long release like he'd been holding years in his lungs. Lily always called this place their secret world. He smiled faintly. Set up here, Snow wasn't just a horse. He was a guardian. The grandfather chuckled softly, voice rough but warm. "She told me once she thought he could hear angels better up here." He wiped his eyes. Maybe she was right. Snow shifted his weight, then turned, not back toward the barn but toward us. His eyes met each face, one by one, like he was reading us, weighing us, forgiving us. And then his gaze stopped on Jonah, steady and deep. Jonah nodded, almost like answering something unspoken. "I know," he whispered. "It's time." The stable girl looked worried. "Time for what?" Jonah brushed Snow's neck. "Not leaving," he said softly. "Choosing." He looked at me. "Some animals get to choose where they finish their story." The girl frowned. "But he's not old." "Age doesn't write the last chapter," Jonah replied. "Love does. Purpose does." Snow stepped toward the grandfather. The old man reached out, laying his hand gently between Snow's ears. His voice shook. "I'm sorry I stayed away." Snow pressed his head into the man's chest, firm, forgiving, final in a peaceful way. A soft sob escaped the grandfather. "She loved you more than anything," he whispered. "And she wasn't wrong." He closed his eyes like he was giving something back to the world. When he opened them, his voice steadied. "He should stay here. Always. This land, this hill, this story, it belongs to both of them." Jonah swallowed. "I was going to sell to save the barn. But I think, maybe saving the barn is letting it become something else." The businesswoman still held her folder, but her voice had changed entirely. "What if we help?" she asked quietly. "A fund, an animal therapy program, for children. For grief. For hope." Jonah blinked at her, stunned. "You would support that?" She looked at Snow, not with calculation now but reverence. "Some deals are bigger than money." The stable girl's face lit with something like sunrise. "He could help so many kids." "He already has," the grandfather whispered. "He just needs the chance to keep going." Snow lowered his head toward the grass again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was a beginning, a quiet vow to carry what love left behind. We all stood still, watching him breathe, watching the world move around him. Light shifted. Leaves whispered. The kind of peace that only comes when a heart finishes breaking and begins rebuilding settled over the hill. Jonah finally spoke, voice strong again. "No one is bidding on him again. Snow isn't property. He's purpose." I nodded slowly. "And purpose isn't for sale." The wind carried that truth like a blessing across the field. The grandfather touched the ribbons in Jonah's pocket. Tie one here, he said gently, tapping the fence post. And keep the other for days when you forget why you stayed. Jonah tied the pink ribbon to the post. It fluttered softly like a small spirit was playing with it. Snow lifted his head and looked toward the barn, not pulled by duty now but by a future forming quietly. A life not of being owned but of guiding, healing, remembering without drowning. Sometimes life doesn't give you a second chance. Sometimes it gives you a second purpose. And at the top of that hill, a promise settled like warm sunlight. He would never wait alone again. Snow walked down the hill slowly, not tired, just thoughtful, like something in him had finally shifted from holding on to living again. We followed behind, quiet, not wanting to disturb the moment. Some goodbyes don't empty a heart, they make space in it. This felt like that. The barn looked different when we returned. Same wood, same stalls, same hay dust floating in soft beams of light, yet somehow everything felt renewed. Like the air understood that grief had loosened its grip. Snow stopped at his stall but didn't enter. Instead he stood in the open space, steady and calm. Jonah rested a hand on his neck again. He's choosing to stay, Jonah said softly. But not as a horse to be owned. As a partner. The businesswoman's voice was gentle now. We'll build the program. Whatever it takes. The stable girl nodded eagerly. Kids who are scared of hospitals, kids who lost someone, kids who feel alone, he can sit with them. Just like he sat with her. The grandfather wiped his eyes, but this time his tears weren't heavy, they were soft, grateful. She would love that, he whispered. She always wanted to help other kids feel brave. Snow nudged Jonah's shoulder as if urging him to speak. Jonah looked at us, me, the girl, the businesswoman, the grandfather, and said quietly, "This barn won't be a business anymore. It will be a place for healing. For children. For quiet hearts. For memories that need a safe place to rest." The stable girl clapped a hand over her mouth, overwhelmed. The businesswoman reached into her coat and tore a page from her own contract, ripping through the number printed at the top. "Then we start today," she said. Snow stepped forward and brushed his head against her arm. She froze, shocked, then smiled, small, humble, like she'd been chosen in a way money could not buy. "Thank you," she whispered to him. The grandfather leaned on the stall door for balance, his voice trembling with relief. She didn't ride him. She just sat with him, told him her fears, her dreams. He let her be small and big at the same time. He placed his palm on Snow's cheek. Now he can do that for others. Snow blinked slowly, calm and knowing, like he understood the mission given to him. Then something unexpected happened. A little girl, thin arms, knit hat, hospital bracelet still around her wrist, peeked from the barn entrance. Her mother held her shoulders, unsure if they should come in. Snow lifted his head and walked toward them. No hurry, no force, just gentle steps. The girl's eyes widened, but she didn't hide. She reached out, tiny fingers brushing his muzzle like she had been waiting for him too. "Hi," she whispered. "You look like a dream." Snow lowered his head, inviting her touch. She giggled, soft and tired but real. Her mother cried quietly behind her. Sometimes healing begins before we even know it has arrived. Jonah looked at me, voice steady again. "Grief brought him here. Love will keep him here." I nodded. "And hope will follow." Snow stood between us all, grandfather, caretaker, stranger, businesswoman, child, binding past to present, lost to purpose, hearts to one another. Not a farewell. A beginning. A horse isn't just an animal when love teaches him to carry souls, not riders. And Snow? He wasn't waiting for someone anymore. He was guiding those still learning how to stay. Some goodbyes don't end love. They change its job. Snow stayed by the little girl as she stroked his face, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from the fragile strength of a body still fighting its battles. Her mother knelt behind her, hands clasped over her own mouth as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Not sadness, something deeper. Relief. Gratitude. Snow lowered his head a little more, letting the girl lean her forehead against him. She closed her eyes, breathing him in. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He held that stillness like a blanket around her, as if saying, "You're safe here. You don't have to be brave alone." Jonah wiped his eyes again, but this time he laughed softly through the tears. "He chose," he whispered. "He really did." The businesswoman placed her folder on a hay bale and stepped forward cautiously. "Whatever this barn becomes," she said, voice thick, "I want to help build it." The stable girl nodded. "We all will." The grandfather stood straighter, one hand on the stall door. "She would have smiled at this," he said. Big smile. The kind that made the whole room warm. The little girl moved back just enough to look Snow in the eyes. You miss someone too? She whispered. Snow breathed out softly, long, warm, gentle, and nuzzled her hat. She hugged him then, arms barely reaching around his muzzle, but love doesn't count inches, it counts truth. You're not alone, she whispered back. The barn breathed with her. We all did. Jonah placed the pink ribbon from the hill next to the purple one on Snow's stall door. These stay here, he said. No matter what. The grandfather nodded. And children will come. And they will sit. And they will heal. Snow turned his head, ears flicking forward, not searching for the past anymore but listening for the future. I looked at the horse, at the ribbons, at the drawing in Jonah's coat pocket, and something in my chest settled. This wasn't a place of loss anymore. It had become a place of keeping. Keeping memories, keeping promises, keeping hearts steady in storms. The little girl whispered to Snow one last time, voice tiny but full of light. Thank you for staying. Snow blinked slowly and it felt like he answered, I always will. And that was it. No grand music. No dramatic ending. Just a horse standing in a barn holding a child who needed him. Just a story that didn't close the door. It opened it. Because real love doesn't finish. It continues. It grows. It finds someone new to carry. And sometimes, it looks like a white horse in a quiet stall, bowing not to say goodbye, but to promise he will walk beside you as long as you need him. Moral lesson. When love loses someone, it does not die. It changes shape and becomes purpose. True goodbyes don't break us. They guide us to who needs us next.